I'm Alexis Ward, and for 15 years I chose the quiet corridors, the places where security lives best. My code sits beneath systems the public never notices, not because it's invisible, but because it's reliable enough to be boring. Aegis Core, my crowning achievement, hums away inside networks for 7 federal agencies: Defense, Homeland Security, and others with acronyms that stay off podiums. It authenticates, refuses, permits, and records with a patience that outlasts political cycles and corporate slogans. I built it piece by meticulous piece, brick by brick, until it became a fortress that forgot nothing and forgave even less. Recognition never mattered to me. I never chased panels or magazine covers. Satisfaction came in the form of logs, a string of quiet green checks at 2 a.m, a handshake completed, an intrusion aborted, a transfer sealed end to end. In my world, the best praise is silence. No alarms, no headlines, no failures. The morning it changed began like any other. I badged into Trionics Federal Systems with a coffee balanced in my left hand and the day's patch list unspooling in my head. The Arlington office gleamed in the clean November light, glass swallowing the sky and reflecting a Capitol silhouette in the distance. I'd written the access choreography for this building, too. The turnstiles, the camera lulls, the random checks that were never random. If you knew how to watch a building breathe, you could tell when its lungs tightened. That morning, they did. Carol from HR glanced at me, then away. Mike from procurement stopped a conversation mid-word. It wasn't disdain. It was theater, stage cues learned overnight. The all-hands calendar block had arrived late the night before, stamped mandatory at 9 a.m. Our new CEO, Vanessa Ryland, favored spectacle. Fresh from a startup that converted nouns into verbs and caution into velocity, she'd come bearing the doctrine of disruption. To her, security was a product differentiator. To me, it was the water the product floated in. Between 6 and 8 each morning, the floor belonged to the engineers. I slid into my corner office, shut the door, and opened the overnight logs. Aegis had dismissed 17 intrusion attempts, mostly automated, occasionally curious, none of them serious. I tuned a threshold, left a breadcrumb for a junior analyst, and sent a status note to Colonel Jim Harrison at the Pentagon. His reply arrived in minutes, as it had for 5 years. Another quiet night. Thanks to you, Alexis. Coffee this week? I smiled, typed a yes, and let the routine carry me forward. 8:45. The flow broke. I walked to the big conference room and felt conversations thin out as eyes approached. The space filled with a curated cross-section of a Trionics, sales in confident clusters, product managers with pristine notebooks, the engineers drifting to the back as if pulled by gravity. Vanessa stood at the front in an electric blue blazer that had already become a brand. She radiated certainty, part performance, part belief. "Good morning, Trionics family," she began. Several shoulders tensed. We weren't a family. We were specialists with obligations that outlasted job titles. She clicked to a slide, buzzwords in a circle, the corporate zodiac. Today marks a pivotal moment in our transformation journey. We're not just evolving, we're revolutionizing our federal approach. I found Dave Chen from Systems Integration across the room. His expression said what mine didn't. Federal clients don't want revolutions. They want continuity, doors that lock, logs that reconcile, updates that don't ripple unpredictably. As part of this transformation, Vanessa said, voice tightening, we need to address some uncomfortable truths. We've become complacent, legacy thinking in a digital-first world. The slide shifted to an org chart with red boxes. Mine was among them. Our technical leadership structure is a relic, she continued. Brilliant people trapped in rigid hierarchies. It's time to streamline. My phone buzzed. Urgent security briefing, 11:30 a.m. Tomorrow, confirm. Pentagon. I confirmed, put the phone face down, and kept my hands folded. Around me, whispers feathered the air. "I want to address one example directly," Vanessa said, and I knew the line before it left her mouth. Alexis Ward. A turn of heads, the quiet pressure of attention. I kept my face still, the way you do when you're diffusing a device you built yourself. Alexis represents the old guard, brilliant and dedicated, but attached to structures that no longer serve our mission. The role of Chief Security Engineer, as currently conceived, is obsolete. We need dynamic teams, not gatekeepers. She reached into her pocket and produced a security badge. My badge. I hadn't noticed it missing from my desk. She held it between two fingers, the way you'd hold a spent match. Effective immediately. We are restructuring. Some roles will be eliminated, others reimagined, and some individuals will find opportunities that better fit their skills. The shredder, a sleek, portable rectangle, whirred to life on the podium. She fed the badge into its mouth. The plastic teeth took it, and the room filled with a small, grinding storm. 20 years, projects, audits, nights, reduced to confetti that smelled faintly of ozone. "Alexis," she said, the smile not reaching her eyes, "thank you for your service. HR will discuss your transition package." The air went static. People didn't breathe. They waited. A CEO expects a scene at moments like this, a protest, an epithet, a story she can later frame as necessary turbulence. I stood, gathered my notebook and pen, and said the only words that mattered. "I understand." My phone buzzed again. Colonel Harrison. Seeing unusual activity in Aegis Core status. I replied without looking down. Architect no longer present. System entering protective mode as designed. His response was immediate. "We'll discuss tomorrow at 11:30. I turned toward the door. At the threshold, I paused. Not for drama, for duty. "For those of you staying," I said quietly, "the system documentation is in the usual place. Follow the protocols exactly. Any deviation will trigger measures you are not prepared for." I watched comprehension pass like a cold wind across the faces of the senior engineers. They knew Aegis wasn't just software, it was an ecology with memory, trained on our rhythms, our cadence, my presence. It knew my typing profile, my voice harmonics, the variance in my pulse after caffeine. It didn't trust lightly, and it didn't forget. "Thank you, Alexis," Vanessa cut in, tone lacquered. "Our team can handle any technical challenge." "I'm sure you believe that," I said, and left the room I'd helped secure. In the elevator, I opened an app that looked like a calculator. It wasn't. The tiles masked a private channel into Aegis's neural lattice, strictly read-only, strictly mine. The metrics had already shifted, more prompts for secondary verification, slower commit windows, wider sampling for anomaly detection. Nothing a user would notice yet. Just a fortress narrowing its gates because a key holder had vanished and a badge had died a theatrical death. Outside, November air bit my lungs. I didn't look back. There is a moment when a system recognizes absence as threat. Not melodrama, mathematics. If a trusted pattern disappears and a provocation follows, a well-trained system grows conservative. It requests more proof, erects more scaffolding, cuts its attack surface down to the bone. That's what Aegis was doing, exactly what I had taught it to do for years in tabletop exercises and midnight refactors. I drove home through familiar Arlington streets while emails stacked in the corner of my secure laptop like snow on a dark railing. Brad Williams, head of security, called before I hit my driveway. "What did you do?" Panic braided his voice. "I didn't do anything, Brad. I was terminated. My access revoked. The system is responding accordingly. We can't get into basic monitoring. It's demanding level 5 authentication for routine checks. That's the self-protection profile. You know the procedures. The documentation references steps only you have clearance for. I stopped at the curb. Then you have a problem. I no longer have authorized access to Trionic systems. Any attempt to help would be illegal. Perhaps the new dynamism will solve it. This isn't a joke. We have federal continuity obligations. Then follow the steps. Exactly. No improvisation. I ended the call, not out of spite, but because boundary keeping was part of the design. A system that bends under pressure is a system you can break with tone and urgency. Aegis refused that psychology. So did I. Inside my house, everything was unchanged. A coat on a chair, a mug from the morning, 3 notebooks on the desk. Handwritten. The true heart of Aegis never lived entirely on a server. It lived in the proofs and diagrams and theorems that dictated how it should behave when confronted with exactly this: abrupt removal of a primary architect and a performative destruction of a credential. Page 1 of Notebook 1 reads, "A security system that cannot protect itself is not secure. It's not poetry. It's a predicate." My secure laptop chimed 17 new urgent emails, and then another, flagged with the quiet gravity of our private protocol. JWS, Jim Harrison. We're seeing performance degradation across all Aegis instances. Briefing moved to 0800. CAR at 700. Priority 1. Priority 1 means national stakes, no time for optics. As evening gathered against the windows, Dave Chen texted, "Emergency war room." Outside consultants brought in. They're talking about forcing a reset. I told him to choose his words carefully in that room. He responded a minute later. They tried. 3 attempts. Lockout now demands biometrics. Retinal, voice, typing cadence. Consultants don't match. Of course they didn't. You don't brute force a system that knows how you breathe. At 3 a.m., Brad again. System rejected Vanessa's override codes. She's threatening legal action against you for sabotage. I replied, I haven't touched a keyboard since I left. Aegis is following its protocols. She thinks you left a kill switch. I didn't build a switch. I built a memory. You removed what it trusted. I set the phone down and slept. A government car would arrive in 4 hours, and I would spend a day in rooms where clocks have no hands, explaining why a fortress with a name had decided to hold its ground. Vanessa called what she did transformation. What she did was pull a pin. Aegis wasn't exploding. It was narrowing to the hard core that keeps a nation's nerves intact. By morning, the green lights would be fewer, but the ones that remained would mean what they've always meant in my world: still secure, still breathing, still ours. Dawn bled pale over Arlington, but I'd been awake long before the alarm. The house was silent, yet the air felt charged. On my desk, the 3 notebooks lay open, as if they, too, had stayed awake, whispering proofs into the dark. These weren't just code sketches. They were my philosophy distilled into graphite and ink. I had written them to be timeless, the way medieval architects carved hidden mason's marks into cathedral beams, not for beauty, but for endurance. The first principle glared up at me from the margin of a page. A system that cannot protect itself is not secure. For years I had defended this position against managers who thought redundancy meant safety, and executives who treated fail fast as a virtue. No. Systems that fail fast fail catastrophically. True security is a fortress that not only repels attackers, but also mistrusts its own custodians when they stop behaving like custodians. It was an old idea, older than computers. I'd studied it in the siege works of Constantinople and the chain-linked defenses of medieval castles. History shows that walls built to withstand armies sometimes fail to treachery from within, a bribe at the gate, a guard who falls asleep. That's why Byzantines built redundant gates and killing corridors, why Japanese castles twisted their approaches into deadly spirals. A fortress must be paranoid about those who hold its keys. Aegis Core, in its own way, had inherited that paranoia. While I drank coffee, messages streamed across my private monitor. Everyone marked urgent. Consultants hired overnight had already tried to force their way into Aegis's bones. At first, they attempted brute force logins, exhausting password dictionaries. Aegis countered by slowing every response, demanding secondary credentials, and then sealing access after 3 failed attempts. When they escalated to code injections, the system responded with its harshest defense, adaptive lockdown. Every login now required biometric triplets, retinal scan, voice sample, and typing cadence, none of which the consultants possessed. To them, it must have looked like sabotage. To me, it looked like a well-trained immune system doing exactly what it was designed for, mistaking reckless surgeons for pathogens and fevering the body into defense. At 5 a.m., my secure line buzzed. Colonel Harrison's voice carried fatigue sharpened into urgency. "Alexis, we've got alarms across every installation. Agencies can't perform routine maintenance without hitting your system's tripwires. Vanessa's people are calling this a meltdown." "It's not a meltdown," I said. "It's vigilance. A fortress is simply treating every knock as hostile because the guard it trusted most was just executed at the gate." There was silence, then a low sigh. "Priority 1 has been declared. You'll brief at 0800. Car arrives at 0700 sharp. Bring your notebooks. And Alexis, be ready. This is already bigger than you, bigger than Trionics. Washington is awake." When the line clicked dead, I thought of the irony. For 15 years, I had lived in deliberate anonymity, unseen except by logs and colonels who valued silence. Now, my silence had been shattered, and the system I built had become noisy in the worst possible way. At 6:30, the emails took a darker tone. Dave Chen again, texting from inside the war room. "They don't understand what they're doing." Vanessa's team tried to roll back firmware. System blocked hardware access entirely, demanding retina and voice match. They're panicking. Another message, more desperate. "She says she'll sue you for building an autonomous system without consent." I closed my eyes and rubbed the bridge of my nose. It was never autonomous. It was obedient, but to the rules I taught it: obey, trust, doubt, change, punish, arrogance. Then came a more chilling signal, a secure call from Deputy Secretary Patricia Chen. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the weight of offices behind her. "Ms. Ward, I need to confirm your status. Are you still employed at Trionics?" "As of yesterday morning, no." "And yet the system you built is locking out its primary contractor." "No, Madam Deputy Secretary, the system is following its protocols. A badge was destroyed, access signatures revoked abruptly." To Aegis, that looks like compromise. It isn't malfunctioning, it's defending. "So you're saying a critical defense infrastructure has gone into lockdown because of a corporate personnel decision?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. Think of it as a fortress whose commander was suddenly executed. The gates close until a new commander proves themselves worthy." Another pause, then, "Your briefing has been elevated. Intelligence representatives will be present." The call ended. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Brad, brittle with panic. "Vanessa's threatening to fire half the engineering staff if they don't find a way in." "Alexis, please, they're going to make things worse." I typed back, "The system is watching. Every failed attempt makes it more distrustful. Tell them to stop before the gates close for good." As the government car rolled up precisely at 0700, I zipped my notebooks into a leather case. In the mirror, I caught my own reflection. Tired, yes, but steady. I had built a fortress, and now that fortress had teeth. Vanessa thought she'd shredded my power with a badge. Instead, she had shredded her only shield. The doorbell rang. A young Marine, crisp uniform, formal silence. I locked the house behind me and slid into the back seat. As we pulled onto the highway, the city outside seemed oblivious. Joggers ran along the river. A bakery unrolled its awning. Across the Potomac, Washington's marble monuments gleamed, unaware that their digital skeleton was rattling. Inside my case, the notebooks pulsed with a truth more enduring than Trionics or its CEO, that systems, like civilizations, must be able to resist their own caretakers when those caretakers become threats. And now, as the Pentagon awaited, I realized that history had shifted. We were no longer talking about a corporate drama. We were talking about sovereignty in the age of code. And Aegis, stubborn, loyal, paranoid Aegis, had just made the first move. The black SUV swept past the Pentagon's familiar main entrance and veered toward a more secluded checkpoint. I'd been through it twice before in my career, both times under conditions marked priority, but never with stakes this high. Guards moved with sharp efficiency, their eyes scanning not just IDs but postures, rhythms, the subtle tells of stress. When they reached my case, the notebooks drew particular attention. Each page was photographed, logged, then handed back with gloves as if returning relics. In truth, that's what they were, blueprints of a living fortress. Colonel Harrison met me in a windowless room 3 stories underground. His face was shadowed by exhaustion, a rough stubble betraying that he hadn't slept. "Alexis," he said, gesturing to a chair, "thank you for coming. You have no idea." "I do," I interrupted gently. "The system is rejecting routine maintenance, isn't it?" By midnight, we had alerts from every installation. He slid a folder across the table, filled with reports stamped classified. "They're calling it degradation. I call it distrust." Before I could reply, the door opened. Deputy Secretary Patricia Chen entered, flanked by 2 men whose silence and posture screamed intelligence community. Their presence turned the air heavy. Chen didn't waste words. "Ms. Ward, 17 agencies rely on Aegis Core. As of this morning, all are reporting operational strain. Can you fix this?" I chose my answer with care. That depends on what you mean by fix. The system is functioning correctly. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect itself when it believes trust has been broken. One of the men leaned forward. "You designed it to lock out your own company?" "I designed it to recognize patterns of trust. Biometric rhythms, operational cadence, continuity. When those vanish abruptly, say when a primary architect is humiliated in front of her peers and stripped of access, it responds defensively." "So this was intentional?" His tone was sharp, accusing. "A dead man's switch?" "Not a switch, a memory. Every line of code, every response curve was intentional. Aegis doesn't explode when provoked. It hardens." Chen raised a hand to silence further cross-examination. "Options, Ms. Ward. We need them." I opened my case and slid out the first notebook. Its spine creaked like an oath. Option 1. Trionics follows the documented transition procedures. 90 days of careful handover, during which I train replacements and transfer biometric authorizations. The system will accept new custodians once it learns to trust them. "Impossible," Harrison muttered. "Vanessa Ryland shredded that bridge." I nodded and turned to a second section. Option 2. I return as an external consultant. Temporary access, oversight, training the new team under government monitoring. Riskier, but still viable. "And if she refuses?" Chen's voice was ice. I closed the book. Option 3. The federal government exercises emergency procurement authority. Assume direct control of Aegis. Build a new structure around it from scratch. Painful, costly, but inevitable if the first 2 fail. A lens pressed in. Silence. The implications hung heavy. Billions in contract disputes, lawsuits, headlines about federal takeover. yet no one dismissed it outright. "There may be a fourth option," I said quietly. "One I've been considering since the moment my badge hit the shredder." I let the words settle. Aegis Core was always bigger than Trionics. The company was a vessel, nothing more. What if we formalize that separation? Create an independent entity responsible for critical infrastructure security, funded by the government, staffed by experts, operating above corporate boardroom whims. Not a contractor. A guardian. Harrison raised his head. "What would you call it?" "Fire Grid," I said. "Federal Infrastructure Resilience Entity for governmental resilience and integrated defense." A grid of firewalls, yes, but also fire in the older sense. Vigilance, warning beacons, the signal fires of antiquity. When the Great Wall was threatened, they lit fires on its towers to summon aid. That's what Fire Grid would be, a network of guardians lighting signals when danger looms. Chen scribbled the acronym onto her tablet. The two intelligence men exchanged glances. One excused himself, murmuring into a secure phone. History was repeating itself in a digital age. Once railroads had been private fiefdoms until federal regulation stepped in. Telegraph and oil monopolies had forced governments to wrest control for the sake of national stability. Now, in the 21st century, the battleground wasn't rails or wires, but code, lines written in silence, capable of paralyzing a nation if mishandled. Chen looked at me squarely. "And you would run this fire grid?" "If asked," I replied. "But more importantly, I'd ensure it was staffed with people who understand that security isn't disruption or flash. It's vigilance. It's boring until the day it isn't." The man who had stepped out returned. He leaned to Chen and whispered something. Her eyes sharpened. "You may get your wish, Ms. Ward. For now, we'll need you to stabilize the system, officially." She slid a folder across the table, papers authorizing me as a temporary technical advisor to the Department of Defense. A new badge would be issued within the hour. Harrison allowed himself the briefest smile. "Looks like the fortress just got its commander back." And I knew, as I signed my name on the line, that this was no longer about one system or one company. This was about the United States deciding whether it still controlled its own skeleton or whether it had handed the keys to people who treated fortresses as playthings. The die was cast. Fire Grid was no longer a vision, it was a necessity. By the time the new badge warmed against my palm, the Pentagon had shifted gears from cautious deliberation to full crisis tempo. Rooms that had felt like mausoleums an hour before now thrummed with keyboards, secure calls, and the rustle of classified printouts. Bureaucracy can move with astonishing speed when the word continuity is threatened. At 2 p.m., I sat in a secure facility, gray walls, no windows, the hum of filtered air, and logged into Aegis Core for the first time since Vanessa had turned my badge into confetti. The system recognized me immediately. Protocols that had grown increasingly suspicious relaxed. Status indicators flipped from red to amber, then finally to green. It was like watching a guard dog recognize its master after a tense standoff. "Hello, old friend," I whispered. The logs told a story that made me wince. Vanessa's imported consultants had tried everything: brute force logins, SQL injections, even crude attempts to bypass physical security modules. Each failure had deepened Aegis's mistrust. It wasn't malfunctioning, it was learning. By the time I authenticated, the system had effectively blacklisted Trionics itself. Colonel Harrison leaned over my shoulder, his voice low. "It thinks the company is an intruder." "It doesn't think," I corrected softly. "It remembers. They taught it to be paranoid by treating it like an obstacle to be conquered. Systems are like people. Treat them with suspicion, and they'll return the favor." That evening, Deputy Secretary Chen delivered the decision. The President had signed an executive order to establish Fire Grid. Its mandate would be simple and sweeping: take over oversight of Aegis Core and any system deemed too critical to be left to the whims of corporate transformation. I wasn't surprised. History had set the precedent. When private railroad barons choked interstate commerce in the 19th century, Washington built the Interstate Commerce Commission. When monopolies strangled oil and steel, antitrust law carved them open. Each time, the same truth emerged: infrastructure too vital to fail could not remain in private hands alone. Now it was happening again, not with rail or oil, but with code, the nervous system of a nation. Vanessa's response came swiftly and predictably. Legal threats, press releases accusing me of sabotage, statements about innovation being stifled by bureaucratic overreach. And she even demanded that the Department of Defense return her system to corporate custody. But the harder she pushed, the more she confirmed the government's fears. Late that night, my secure messenger lit up with a note from Dave Chen. Vanessa's furious. Fired Brad for refusing to bypass protocols. She's doubling down with her consultants. We're in a war room, but it feels like a siege. I typed back, tell them to tread lightly. Every failed attempt feeds the lockdown. They're trying to storm a fortress designed to resist storming. It will not end well. The next morning, the recruiting began. FireGrid needed more than me. It needed a spine of people who understood Aegis not just as code, but as philosophy. Dave was first. He resigned from Trionics with nothing but a text: I'm done. Where do you need me? Brad followed a day later, relieved to leave behind Vanessa's purge. By week's end, a dozen had joined me, some from government, some from the private sector. All veterans of long, invisible wars fought in server rooms at 3 a.m. I gathered them in a secure conference room and leveled with them. I can't promise you recognition. You won't be on magazine covers. You won't be invited to keynote conferences. What you will be is indispensable. The hours will be long, the rewards invisible, the pressure relentless. But you'll be building something that matters. Brad gave a short laugh. So, business as usual, only with better leadership? Something like that, I said. The mood lightened, but beneath it I could sense their shared understanding. This was not just another project. It was a turning point. Trionics had treated security as a cost center. FireGrid would treat it as the spine of national survival. Meanwhile, the government machinery clanked into motion. Budgets were drafted, authority lines drawn, legal frameworks prepared for inevitable courtroom battles. By the third day, FireGrid had a temporary headquarters, a nondescript building in Virginia, retrofitted overnight with secure lines and blast-proof windows. Still, Vanessa wasn't finished. At 6 p.m. one evening, my secure phone rang. The caller ID, Ryland V. Her voice was cool, brittle. Ms. Ward, I understand you're interfering with Trionics operations. I'm performing authorized maintenance on federal systems under emergency powers. Those systems are under Trionics contracts. Your access is a violation. Section 15.3.2, I said. Read your contracts. Emergency intervention is permitted when contractor actions threaten system integrity. There was a long pause. You orchestrated this, she snapped. The lockouts, the government takeover, FireGrid. It's a coup dressed up as patriotism. No, I replied. You lit the fuse. All I did was design a system that protects itself. You tried to break it. This is the result. You'll regret this, she said, and cut the line. I set the phone down, exhaled slowly, and looked around the empty room. She still didn't understand. This was never about her or me. It was about trust. Once broken, impossible to reclaim quickly. The next morning, as my new team filed into our Virginia bunker, I realized something striking. For years, I'd been a shadow, known only to colonels and classified briefings. Now, for the first time, I stood at the head of an organization with a name, a mission, and a mandate born not of corporate ambition, but of necessity. FireGrid had been born not in a boardroom, but in a breach of trust, and like the fortress it inherited, it would learn to distrust anything that sought to weaken it. Washington has always lived in two layers, the visible one of marble, monuments, and press briefings, and the invisible one of hotel bars, private dinners, and whispered negotiations. When Vanessa asked for a meeting at the Mayflower Hotel, I recognized the setting for what it was, a stage for reconciliation, or at least the performance of it. The bar smelled of leather and old wood, the kind of place where senators once carved compromises into whiskey glasses. Vanessa sat in the corner booth, stripped of her electric blue armor. A muted gray blazer, hair tied back, eyes scanning the room for predators. When she saw me, she rose with a tight smile. "Ms. Ward, thank you for coming." I sat across from her, ordered a scotch, and waited. Silence is a weapon in negotiations. She lasted only seconds. "I underestimated you," she admitted, "and more importantly, I underestimated what you built. Aegis Core isn't a product. It's a culture. My team tells me we may be locked out for a month, maybe permanently. Meanwhile, the government is creating FireGrid with you in charge. I need to know if there's still a path forward for Trionics." Her words surprised me, not their content but their tone, less arrogance, more desperation. Desperation has its own honesty. "What do you want, Vanessa?" "A partnership, transition support. Let us contribute resources, personnel, anything FireGrid needs. In exchange, we keep our other contracts alive. I know I made mistakes, but Trionics doesn't deserve to die for them." I studied her carefully. Here sat a woman who had once shredded my badge like a trophy. Now she was asking for mercy. History is full of such reversals. Emperors who mocked advisors only to recall them in crisis. Kings who exiled visionaries and then begged their return. Rome did it with Cicero. England did it with Churchill. And Trionics apparently was doing it with me. "I can't make that decision alone," I told her, "but I can present it to the right people." "That's all I ask." She lifted her martini, then set it down untasted. "And Alexis, I'm sorry, about the badge, about the theater. I thought humiliation would show strength. It only showed weakness. Apologies in corporate Washington are as rare as eclipses. Her sincerity, or her ability to simulate it, gave me pause. Still, sincerity doesn't erase consequences. "What matters," I said, "is what you do next. FireGrid will exist, with or without Trionics. But there's room for cooperation, if you learn the first rule of infrastructure." She tilted her head. "Which is?" "Boring is good. If your systems are exciting, something's wrong." She gave a short, rueful laugh. "You really did play chess while I was playing checkers." "No, I built a fortress that remembered who it trusted. You decided to fire the gatekeeper. The rest followed naturally." And the conversation ended without handshake or deal, but with something rarer, recognition. For the first time, Vanessa understood that she wasn't fighting me. She was fighting the inevitability of a system that refused to be broken. The next morning, the government announced FireGrid publicly. Cameras flashed, questions flew, headlines speculated about nationalization and cyber wars. I stood at the podium, delivering careful answers about continuity and vigilance, all while remembering the silence of Aegis logs at 2 a.m. Behind the scenes, FireGrid's skeleton hardened. Dave Chen accepted the role of Chief Technology Officer. Brad took over security operations. Sarah Martinez, recruited from NSA, joined as liaison for intelligence integration. Within a week, our dozen had grown to 50. Not many, but each one a fortress in human form. People who understood that security isn't glamorous, but without it, nations crumble. And still, Vanessa circled. She called, she wrote, she offered concessions. "The board has approved cooperation," she said in one message. We're ready to provide whatever FireGrid needs. History has a way of humbling the arrogant. Monarchs kneel to parliaments, monopolies bow to regulators, and CEOs who once believed themselves untouchable find their contracts hanging by threads. Vanessa had shredded my badge to show dominance. Now she was learning the oldest lesson of power: destroy the wrong thing, and you may discover it was the very shield protecting you. For me, the reckoning wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. Recognition that the work of invisible engineers had weight equal to generals and senators. Recognition that some systems are too vital to be disrupted by quarterly visions. FireGrid wasn't just an organization, it was a signal fire on the wall, warning that the age of corporate fiefdoms in national defense had ended. And those who wished to survive would need to decide quickly whether they wanted to fight the fire or join in keeping it lit. The weeks that followed felt like a paradox, both frantic and strangely calm. Outwardly, FireGrid was in a sprint, securing oversight of 17 federal systems, drafting new operating protocols, and recruiting specialists at a pace Washington rarely tolerates. But inwardly, for the first time in years, I felt stillness. Every morning, the logs whispered their quiet green checks. Every evening, our systems hummed in unison like a choir of guarded silences. Security had become what it was always meant to be, boring again. And boring, I reminded my team daily, is beautiful. Trionics, meanwhile, bent but did not break. Vanessa accepted the terms of cooperation. For all her boardroom bravado, she had enough pragmatism to see that fighting FireGrid outright would mean annihilation. She returned engineers she had fired, reinstated policies she once mocked, and began sending emissaries to our headquarters, eager to prove Trionics could still play a role in the new landscape. For the first time, she seemed to understand that strength wasn't shredding badges. It was respecting the systems that quietly held the nation together. 6 months in, FireGrid had grown to 50 employees and oversight of 23 critical systems. We had prevented 4 intrusion attempts, serious ones, the kind that might have made headlines if they hadn't been stopped. Instead, they became little more than footnotes in our internal logs. That was our measure of success. No one outside our walls even knew we'd won. History, however, has a long memory for turning points. When I testified before Congress, I told them what I had told the colonels years earlier. A security system that cannot protect itself is not secure. The words, once scribbled in a notebook margin, had become the doctrine of an entire agency. And as I stood in that chamber, I thought of other moments when nations had finally recognized their invisible architects, the code breakers at Bletchley Park, whose work ended wars without parades, the NORAD engineers who built vigilance into radar screens that never blinked, the telegraph operators of the 19th century who wired a continent together with copper and silence. FireGrid was our generation's echo of those stories. Vanessa's story, too, found its transformation. She stepped down as CEO and announcing she would dedicate herself to educating future executives on the responsibilities they bore toward systems they didn't understand. When she visited me months later, she admitted the truth. "When I shredded your badge, I thought I was proving strength. What I proved was ignorance. Real strength was what you showed. Protecting the system, even when humiliated." I didn't need her apology, but I accepted it. Because the legacy of Aegis and FireGrid was not about grudges, it was about continuity, about ensuring that no executive, no boardroom whim could ever again compromise what millions of lives depended upon. And so my life returned in its own way to where it had always been. In the logs, the green lights, the quiet. The recognition I had never sought now clung to me, but I treated it like background noise. What mattered was that the fortress held, that the systems breathed in silence, that the nation slept under the watch of guardians no one would ever see. The real revenge was never in watching Trionics stumble or in watching Vanessa bend. It was in building something that would outlast us all, something boring, resilient, and invisible, the kind of strength that only history will recognize years later when it whispers that there was once a moment when silence itself was saved. Because in the end, security is not spectacle, it is endurance. It is the green check mark that no one notices at 2 a.m. It is the fortress that stands, patient and unyielding, long after the noise of egos has faded. And as I approved another authentication request from Aegis Core, I smiled. We were still here, still watching, still protecting. That was the greatest revenge of all.